You have to be frank. I think we have to recognise that we have an important relationship with Europe, and that if Donald Trump is going to single out Europe as part of his target, that's singling out us as well, because we are interrelated with the European economy. And I think that you have to remember the MAGA, Make America Great Again. This is all about a populist appeal to a certain section of American opinion based on the prejudices about immigration, about economic frustration, and it's all about pandering to that group who tend to be rather right-wing, and therefore people who would not be natural allies of mine.
Although he won very decisively in that sense, didn't he, Donald Trump, in the election?
That merely reinforces my anxieties.
Right. I mean,
because there is sweeping the world a deep memory of the 1930s, economic hardship, the contrast between fascism and communism, and that is being exploited by leader after leader in this country, in Europe and in America. These are very dangerous times we live in.
Well,
I think that the creation of the single market was Margaret Thatcher's greatest achievement. And it was a culmination of the determination that war should be eliminated from the landmass of Europe. I was rather keen on these ideas, and I am appalled by Brexit. I don't believe for an instant that we should accept the verdict of a pack of lies which was paraded by various people in order to persuade people that we had to sever our relationship with Europe.
But that was a vote in 2016. We did leave in 2019. Now, looking at it, how far would you advocate getting closer to the EU in economic terms?
Straight down the line, I would go back into Europe, to the heart of Europe. And do you know why? Because I believe it is in the best interests of a generation of young British people. This question of, we voted in 2016, the deal is done. What is democracy about? I have lived through generation after generation where Conservatives have opposed Labour nationalisation programmes. We undid them, and we said we would undo them, despite the fact they had a mandate.
But then we have a referendum, which rather changes the conversation somewhat. If you do have a referendum, then it's pretty difficult to say, actually, we're going to change your mind a few years later. I mean, you could argue that referendums are the wrong way of going about it, but we had a referendum on Scottish independence, for example. I mean, these are pretty big, these are things that you don't really want to repeat, but it's difficult to ignore.
Right.
But why can't you have another referendum?
Well,
may I say
put it to the British people?
I'd love to know what the appetite is for a second referendum.
Look, you've got all the polls indicating clearly now that people know that they were hoodwinked, they were deceived.
I haven't seen the polls backing a second referendum.
The majority is now in favour.
Well, there are
certainly
certainly polls saying a closer relationship. What that may entail.
Like that.
But we have to be very clear what our purpose is, and it's British self-interest. And we are a European power. We always have been a European power. And there are tensions with the Atlantic relationship. And I personally am a great admirer of Pax Americana. But that doesn't mean to say that I think that Britain's interests are American interests.
Right. Well, Emily, are you right that actually you should perhaps risk upsetting Donald Trump and the US administration by embracing that closer relationship economically with the EU?
I don't think it has to be that you upset them by embracing a closer relationship. We need to have a closer relationship. Our agreement is not complete, and there's more work that needs to be done. That's that's that.
What are you going to say as a government if Trump threatens military action to achieve power in Greenland?
Well, that's a different issue.
No, it's not a different issue. It is a fundamental issue where the President of the United States has threatened to use force to acquire Greenland.
So it's a different issue because the first issue is, should we have a closer economic relationship with the European Union? And the second issue, with respect, sir, is that it's about the nature of NATO and the fact that you would have one NATO country threatening other NATO countries. The question is, would it really ever happen? I don't believe it would. I think that, certainly there's no reason why particularly the Inuits should be asked whether or not they would want to have. They already have one base. Would they like to have a larger base with with regard to America, particularly if there are more jobs coming from it? I mean, that's the kind of conversation that one needs to have. I don't think we need to catastrophise necessarily. Yeah. I may be wrong, but I think it's best to approach this optimistically.
Well, I heard all this in 1938. It won't happen. Peace in our time.
Do it now, particularly with the increases in national insurance. What advice would you give him and the government in terms of the decisions they've made when they still want to push for growth in the economy?
Well, to him, I have to say that I understand your problem, but you're in business, you've got to find a way through. And at the present moment with the government, you've had burdens placed on you which make that difficult. I can sympathise, but you do not have the power to do anything about that. If I were talking to the government, which is a very different story, they started off by explaining what a terrible state the economy was in, and people came to understand that. Then they taxed employment. And it's not surprising, therefore, that industrial, commercial people are going to employ less people. Devastating. They attacked the small and medium-sized privately owned companies. I happen to be one. And I am shattered that the decisions we now have to think about, floating the company, selling the company, or restraining the activities of the company to stop higher levels of taxation and using dividends, which we want to use to grow, in order to pay the inheritance tax, taking it out in dividends, paying the tax on the dividends. It is a shattering indictment of all that matters in the small and medium-sized family business. But that's a personal cry.
Right. Well, let me get Emily.
Just before we get off, the big thing is to get the economy growing, and they're using the language, but they're not taking the decisions. And we can get on to that subject, in which I have very strong views based on long experience, but that's not the agenda that you're talking about this minute.
Let's talk about some of the substantive issues on growth. Do you support a third runway at Heathrow?
Oh, yes, this is a scandal. It has been in the make for decades.
Yes.
Of course we should. If you don't have... What happens if you don't expand Heathrow is that the new markets don't get served from London because we're at capacity. And therefore, where do they go? They switch to Europe. And, you know, we're in a competitive world. So... But I just can't... We've been listening to the small businesses and how under 4 people they have special privileges. What are you saying? If you've got a small business, stay at 4. That is exactly what you don't want them to do. You want them to expand. Immediately they cross the threshold, the bills go up.
Well, Emily, that's true.
Absolutely. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and obviously the problem with all of these things always is the cut-off, you know, and it can't apply to everyone. And if we applied it to 8, then the moment that the business got more than 8, then they would get hit as well. I mean, it's, you know, you have to put a line somewhere.
Right. And are you in
given
support?
that the majority of small businesses are that small, and 50% of business in the country will be, I mean, it seems like a threshold that makes sense.
On the business, small business, we are very good at creating small businesses. We are not good at turning small businesses into medium businesses. That is a problem. Coupled with the very difficult productivity achievements in this country, these are real problems which need to be addressed.
Well, and I'll heat the right way round. And in it, you talk about the best way, the policies that you have supported, increasing prosperity, driving growth, restoring hope, the creation of devolution, directly elected mayors, which has happened. And we can show you here in Toxteth, because you were, this was after the riots, in Liverpool, in favour, of course, of regeneration of big cities, Liverpool in Merseyside, parts of London's East End and central Manchester. You've heard Emily say that she has concerns about things like the third runway at Heathrow. But are you broadly signed up to the government's agenda to bulldoze through planning and get on with trying to do big infrastructure projects?
I'm a bore on this subject.
Don't say that first.
I first became involved in the 1960s, when the last serious analysis of the problems of Britain's ineffective economy was produced in a report by Redcliffe Maud. He looked at 1,300 authorities and he said it's got to go down to 60. We've got down to 300. And there are now clearest possible indications as to what needs to be done. And in my book, I set out the steps over those many decades, little by little, in which government after government have moved. But they have not learnt the lessons, which means you need to plan economies from the local area, involving the local people, the industry, the universities, the local authorities, the quangos, and you need to evolve a strategy based on the real world. We have a strategy where separate functional departments, transport, health, housing, tell people what to do. And that is not compatible with the growth agenda. Second thing, you have to give them incentives locally. There is £10 billion in the Public Accounts Committee today. Public Accounts, not Committee. Public Accounts.
I was going to say they're well off the Public Accounts.
£10 billion, which could be made available for local strategic plans to bid. And by doing that, it doesn't cost you any more money, but you can make a condition that the local people have to show how there would be additional money as a consequence.
Do you think
we have proved that this works. George Osborne began with a £2 billion a year fund. This government has cut that, and now there are debates going on about whether or not we should actually entrust and enthuse those local communities.
Well, do you think Kemi Badenoch, the newish leader of the Conservative Party, will embrace those things?
It doesn't matter what Kenny does. I mean, she's irrelevant in terms of this decision. She will not be in power for 5 years. We have not got 5 years to waste making these decisions. This is a matter for Keir Starmer, his government, and the decisions needs to be done now. The agenda is now unfolding.
You're throwing the gauntlet down to the government, but doesn't it matter where the Conservative Party, where your party is and what it's saying on these things? I mean, Kemi Badenoch's been very clear she wants to have a smaller state. She hasn't set out how.
Look, we've been through all that stuff. This is the argument of the Thatcher regime in the 1980s. I privatised more of the public sector than any other minister in history. And so I know about the virtues and desirability of privatisation. What I also learnt, and you showed the story, Liverpool, is the interdependence of the private sector and the public sector. And if you've got to get them to work together, and you've got to do it locally, and you've got to offer them an incentive to make it possible for them to do it. What the whole political system is doing in this country and across Europe. What do you think Mr. Trump is all about when he says the immigrants are all criminals and all this sort of stuff? What do you think Farage is doing when he's talking about getting our country back? It's all about racial hatred, racial tensions. We saw it with the Jews in the 1930s. We saw it with Enoch Powell in the 1960s. And we have now got a new version of it across Europe and in America.
Right.
And I tell you this, the Conservative Party will not come back to power if it panders to the likes of Nigel Farage.
The man behind Brexit, and a man who led brilliantly the United Kingdom Independence Party.
Daisy. Come on then.